This video is sponsored by Hooktheory. Elliott Smith has a way of writing such infectious, captivating, emotionally stimulating chord progressions. But what is it about his chord progressions that make them sound this way? Well, I decided to find out by going through all 7 albums of his work, listening to every song, and by doing that I've identified 2 main aspects, 2 main features of his chord progressions that give them their distinctive sound. The first element is a particular chord that he uses a lot, especially when he's in the major key, and that is the major version of the 2 chord. 40% of Elliott's songs use this major 2 chord, which for most songwriters is a fairly rare and unusual chord to use. And if we just look at Elliott Smith songs which are in the major key, then that number goes up to 64.5% of his songs using this unusual major 2 chord. The major 2 chord refers to the major version of the 2nd chord in the key. So if we were in the key of C major, for example, usually by default, because of the notes of the C major scale, we have a D minor chord. But we could swap that for a D major chord, a chord that is not diatonic to the key. That introduces a new note into the song, F sharp instead of F natural, casting a bright, brilliant sound into the harmony. For example, Ballad of Big Nothing is in the key of C major, but here we have not D minor, but the D major chord. A similar example is Speed Trials. Here we're moving from the 1 chord to that special major 2 chord and then the 4th chord of the key F. And this 1 major 2 4 chord progression is something that Elliott has used on various occasions. We can also see it here on Clementine, which happens to also be in the key of C. And we can see it on Coming Up Roses, which is in the key of B flat. I'm a junkyard full of false stars, and I don't need... This particular order of chords really brings out the brightness of that major 2 chord, because we start with the tonic chord establishing the key, then we move to that major 2 chord with its stark, brilliant sound, and then when we move to the 4 chord, that raised 4th degree, which gave the major 2 chord its unusual bright sound, moves back down to the regular 4th degree. So we almost get this sense of relief as that bright, dazzling sound dulls down to its more typical diatonic sound. I've discussed before actually how this exact chord progression has been used in many other songs, particularly those by the Beatles. This is one of the many chord tricks I think that makes Elliott Smith's music sound akin to the Beatles, which is probably a big part of why I love Elliott Smith so much. But Elliott doesn't always use the major 2 chord in this 1, 2, 4 pattern. In 2:45 AM, he's used the major 2 chord moving to the minor 2 chord, which, much like major 2 moving to 4, gives us that contrast of going from the non-diatonic, dazzling major 2 to the diatonic, slightly duller, regular 2 chord, the minor 2 chord. Looking for somebody's arms too. And Say Yes is based on this descending chord pattern that works its way down to the major 2 chord, which in this case is G. I'm in love with the world through the eyes of the girl who's still around the morning after. Now there's 2 labels in music theory that we could use to analyse this major 2 chord, this non-diatonic 2 chord. The first is what we call a secondary dominant. The regular dominant chord, the primary dominant, is the 5th chord of the key. So in the key of C, the dominant chord is G. The secondary dominant is the 5th chord of any of the other chords in the key. So for example, if we had the 5th chord of G, the 5th of the 5th, that would be a secondary dominant. That would be D7 or just D major. And that's our major 2 chord, right? So the chord D major or D7 in the key of C is a secondary dominant. It's the 5 of 5, the 5th chord of the 5th chord. So that's one label we could use to describe this major 2 chord, but another label we could use is modal mixture or modal interchange, and for reasons I'll explain in a minute, I think this is probably the more appropriate label for this use of the major 2 chord. Modal mixture or modal interchange is when we mix chords from parallel scales. So for example, if we were in C major, we could borrow chords from a parallel scale like C Lydian. In C Lydian, the 2 chord is D major rather than D minor. So by using the D major chord in the context of C major, we're effectively borrowing it from Lydian. So it's a bit like on this chord, we are temporarily leaving major and going to Lydian, just for this one chord. That's modal mixture. If you're interested in music theory, then you'll be interested in hook theory. Hook theory offers a whole range of resources for developing your understanding of music theory. For example, they have an ear training app that teaches you to recognise chords. They also offer 2 interactive music theory textbooks which, much like my own videos, teach music theory by using well-known songs to exemplify and explain music theory concepts. On top of this, Hook Theory's HookPad is a great tool that helps you apply music theory concepts in your own songwriting. As you compose, HookPad helps you make smart choices for your notes and chords. Enjoy 20% off select Hook Theory products by following the link in the description. Now, the reason I prefer describing the major 2 chord here as an example of modal mixture rather than a secondary dominant is because the second aspect of Elliott's chord progression writing that I identified when I listened through to all of these songs was his wider use of modal mixture, of modal interchange. Something that Elliott does a lot on his songs is blend between the major key and the minor key, to the point that we're not really in either, we're sort of in both at the same time. For example, his song LA is definitely in the key of E, but whether it's in E major or E minor can change from bar to bar, and sometimes it's ambiguous. For example, the beginning of the verse starts with E5, an E power chord, so a chord that doesn't even have a major or minor third. Then we go to F sharp minor, which is a chord taken from E major. Then we go to E minor 7, which is obviously a chord from E minor, not major. Then we move to C major 7, which is taken from E minor, not E major. Later in the chorus though, we resolve to E major. We're moving from E major and E minor so often that we're kind of just in both. This is a prime example of modal mixture, and it gives the harmony this really lush, rich sound where we're constantly flitting between the brighter major and the darker minor. This is a technique that many songwriters have used and was particularly prevalent in the Beatles songwriting and also in Radiohead songwriting. Another example of this modal interchange blending between major and minor is Son of Sam. This song begins with a passage that's reasonably clearly in A minor, but then as we move into the verse, we don't resolve back to A minor as we would predict, but instead go to A major. Something's happening. Later in the verse though, via this F chord, we pivot back into A minor. So at different times in the song, we are in A minor or A major, swinging us between light and dark. So there you go, modal interchange with particular heavy use of the major version of the 2 chord, and you'll be on your way to writing a Elliott Smith-esque chord progression. Couple that with some lo-fi acoustic guitar and a double-tracked vocal, and you'll be getting very close to that Elliott Smith sound. If you enjoyed this video, I highly recommend you check out Brian Crock's video on what he describes as the Elliott Smith chord, which, spoiler alert, is this major 2 chord that I'm talking about. In Brian's video, he compares Elliott's use of the chord to the same use of the chord in Phoebe Bridgers' music. Phoebe Bridgers is yet another one of my favourite artists, and one of Phoebe's favourite artists is Elliott Smith. So as Brian points out in his excellent video, you can see in Phoebe's music the influence of Elliott Smith. Let me know in the comments what your favourite Elliott Smith song is, or if you didn't know about Elliott Smith before watching this video, then do go check him out because he's one of my absolute favourite artists of all time.